Good evening. How are you? Well, I'm still in Williamsburg at the meeting of the conservation districts, the soil and water conservation districts, and we're talking about various policy that affects what we do in terms of best practices for people to maintain the richness of the soil, which can take 1,000 years to condition to a usable nature, and the water, which is under siege and under difficult conditions. In fact, I championed a resolution that said we have to pay attention to data centers. But while we're down here, other things are going on, and ahead of the list is whatever Trump's daily craziness is in terms of unconstitutional, in terms of in violation of the law, unlawful, bad taste, bad for a whole variety of reasons. And the fact that he would say that Maduro's days are numbered, like he's going to throw him out of office at this length without Congress passing a resolution of war or anything that would justify anything like he's proposed. And there are stories, don't know if they're true, that there are U.S. troops on the ground. The CIA has been involved. And some conservatives are talking out. When I say conservatives, I'm really talking about Republicans, because there are conservatives untied to any partisan loyalty who are upset about what's going on in terms of America's position in the world, and in this case in South America. So Senator Hawley, for example, who is very concerned about this, he says he's very skeptical of the need to send troops to Venezuela. So how do we justify troops, and how do we justify CIA when, in the absence of an exercise of the war power by the Congress deciding that it should happen or not? And it kind of makes sense about his overall look at how he handles personnel and so forth in policy. Trump disfavors education. It's obvious in his personnel, it's obvious in his policy that dumb is best when you want pliable, subordinate tools. I can't think of a more polite way to say it. I can think of a lot of other ways to say it, but I can't think of a better way to say it. And, an example of how bizarre things are is that apparently there's been a change in how we cover up the killing of two survivors, that is, after the initial onslaught and attack on a fishing boat. They say it was a drug boat, and 9 of the 11 people were killed. And then after 45 minutes, according to reports, they killed 2 survivors who crawled back up onto the wreckage. And Trump originally said there was no problem releasing the video of this September 2nd incident. Then what we have is now Trump says he didn't say that, although there's tape of it and it's being played and so forth. And so he's now deferring to Hegseth, who's the Secretary of Defense, although he prefers to be considered the Secretary of War, because I guess that's who he is and what he wants to do. And he is the point man, if you will, for the crime charge for these deaths. And you have to ask yourself, with regard to Trump, what motivates him. And the thing is, he's an evil man. You don't have to have aphasia or dementia, not to do what he did. And so what we really have is lying and a cover-up of no less than murder from the head of all military things in America by Constitution. And he's doing this from the commander-in-chief all the way down to Hegseth and whomever else was involved in this, who didn't say, I'm going to disobey that order because it's unconstitutional and wrong. So what can we do about it? Well, we could do lots of things. Hegseth should be suspended between his violations of confidentiality and, in this case, actually murdering somebody in the open seas where we have no legal right or jurisdiction to be there, to commit a crime that there's no evidence that happened, and of people who couldn't fight back and didn't fight back, and nor were we in a position to be at risk for waiting upon what we should or shouldn't do. And so then ultimately what we did do was kill the remaining witnesses. So we'll never know what they were going to say. Another chapter in Trump's bizarre behavior is he slammed 60 Minutes of the interview by Leslie Stahl of Representative Green. Now, Representative Green spoke of the threat she's getting because of what Trump said when their political alliance, if you will, and or friendliness evaporated. Then we have Trump, another episode. He's attacking European allies, calls Europe weak and decaying. And he says they may not be viable countries any longer. What is his endgame? What is his endgame? And his endgame seems to be to destroy America in every way possible. And I don't know if it's as a subordinate to Putin of a deal. I don't know what he could possibly have over a guy who's no shame for all the other things he does. What could it possibly be? And I guess it's a combination of sex and money and, all the things that ring Trump's chimes and that Putin has an angle on. And for years, businessmen who went there, whether or not they thought they were going to run for president, were taped and invited to do things to compromise them, and there's even a term for it. The sense of the nation is kind of interesting in response. We've talked a little bit about how we're getting acquittals by juries because they side with the defendant despite whether or not he did the deed. In fact, they're fine with the fact that he did the deed. And the best example, the current one that's going on, is Luigi Mangione, who became kind of a hero by killing the CEO, Brian Thompson, for United Health Insurance. And they presently have a hearing which suggests that they may have secured his arrest and detained him in custody without probable cause, but more importantly, they seized his bag from him, and it was separated from him when he, that is Luigi, was in custody, and he had his hands in handcuffs, and he was a distance from his bag. And so then the officers decided to look through the bag, and they did. And they should have gone and gotten a search warrant. I don't know if they had enough evidence to look in the bag, because what evidence did they have that something was in there? They may have had such evidence, but they didn't do what was necessary. I may have mentioned the other day, I've had a number of these hearings, both as a defense counsel and as a prosecutor. And the facts speak for themselves if the people who are in place are honest, and good investigators who make mistakes will have in their notes what they did wrong and own up to it. Because sometimes people are anxious. These are sometimes dangerous situations. I don't get the sense that's what was going on in this case with Luigi Mangione. And the effect of a popular defendant who does something that the community thinks is okay is it's a judicial, it's a non-judicial judgment by a jury. This guy, even though the whole law may say it, the judge may have instructed me to do it, I'm going to acquit this guy. And so that happened in another instance with the fellow who threw a sub at a soldier, and they tried to prosecute him for a felony, and the grand jury wouldn't do it. And then they did try it as a misdemeanor, and the petit jury, the small jury, they acquitted him. So the Mangione case has the feeling of the next case up that could fall into this category. Generally speaking, we have an ongoing crisis, and we see steps against Trump, and we see a spread of discussion and criticism from among Republicans. There are more judicial rulings against Trump. And what Trump and his corrupt minion hope is that we will be so tired of what they're doing, which is so criminal and obstructive and misleading and autocratic instead of Republican or Democratic, small d Democratic. And so we have to persist. We have to talk about things as they are, and by shining that light, we have an ability to inform other citizens and to create pressure, legitimate pressure, in terms of persuadability that this is not the way to run a government. And we're shedding our allies offshore. We're proposing war. We're a week before Putin. We are not part of the club that involves China and South Korea and Russia. And so we are being compressed, and it's done with the volition and intent of Trump. He is the enemy within. Robert Kennedy wrote a book many years ago called The Enemy Within. And what it was about the Teamsters and how it was a criminal organization. And Bobby Kennedy and his task force, when he was the Attorney General, they went after these crimes and so forth. And we have a situation now in which we need that dedication to reassert the America that we believe is our own, that we believe in. And I was asked the other day by our guests from Ireland what I thought, and I said, well, there have been indications, but the way I look at it is if the president has 30 to 40% and we have 60%, and we have the majority of people who are thoughtful, the only thing that's missing is the right action to go with that. So I expect to be back in Northern Virginia sometime tomorrow, unless we decide to move out tonight and get back to our critters and my practice. So all the best. I hope you found this interesting. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.